Well, that's getting going. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Madeline Hamilton. I am the host of the architecture residency that we host here at T-Space in Stephen Hill Foundation every summer. It's a 25-day intensive residency program that is now hybrid. So you see our residents up there joining from around the world. And they participate in a design project for, right now they're designing an educational pavilion for a site in Hudson. And, oh, and Irene is here too, so I can maybe let you take it away.
Sure, yes. Hello, Mimi. How are you?
Hi, Edie.
So good to see you, and hello.
I know where you are.
I know, I'm in New York City. It's a pleasure to have you, Mimi, for this hybrid event. I'm just taking on from Madi to very briefly introduce the residency program. I see a few guests at the T2. It's the Upstate Art Weekend. And so we found that opportunity to have Mimi lecture and get some insights about your work in association with the residency program, which runs every summer. And it is a 25-day intensive in July. Our residents are preparing for a final presentation just this Friday, so they're past the midpoint right now. And the theme for the residency is the idea of correlations. And so we have been unpacking this through their work and through a series of lectures that have already happened this lecture series. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to all the supporters, because the residents are actually able to join the program free of charge, and they're given a travel stipend to come to New York and arrive at Rhinebeck, and they will be there beginning of August, and so we will have the chance to meet in person. And I think I will just really pass it on to our residents. They're here on the panel from different parts of the world. And they will be really running the show. They will be introducing you more formally, Mimi, and I will just let them run the show. Thank you so much.
All right. Let me get started. So just give a brief introduction. It is a thrill and honor to introduce Mimi Hoang to the T-Space Rhinebeck and Stephen Myron Hull Foundation Architecture Lecture Series. Mimi Hoang is a distinguished architect known for her innovative contributions to urban design and architecture. As a co-founder and principal of N Architects in Brooklyn, New York, she leads a practice that emphasizes social engagement, sustainability, and contextual sensitivity. Her projects, including cultural centers, residential buildings, and public spaces, are marked by a commitment to improving urban life and fostering community connections. A graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Design and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Hoang combines rigorous academic training with a keen awareness of architecture's cultural and environmental impacts. One of her notable projects is Carmel Place, New York City's first micro-unit apartment building, which offers an innovative solution to the city's housing challenges. Under her leadership, N Architects has received numerous awards, including multiple AIA New York Design Awards and the AIA New York State Firm of the Year Award, among an extensive list of other accolades. In addition to her practice, Hoang is a dedicated educator, teaching at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. She also actively participates in professional organizations advocating for inclusive and adaptable urban environments. Through her poetic vision, Mimi Hoang redefines architectural paradigms, crafting spaces that inspire and endure. Thank you so much, Mimi, for joining us today. Please join me in warmly welcoming Mimi Hoang.
Thank you so much, Mason. Shall I share screen?
Yeah.
Okay. I was very excited when I received the brief about the residency and realized that, you know, that it was centered around Kiesler's life work and the idea of correlations. So I was excited because Eric and I have looked at Kiesler and thought about these ideas for a very, very, very long time. I would say that is one of the most inspiring and still fruitful conversations that we have around this idea that it's not really the form that matters. It's the correlations. I don't know how. I think of it as correlations because correlations for me is quite causal, cause and effect, and it's very direct. And the way that we think about it is in a very kind of messy way that that architecture shapes social behavior, that we can think about design in terms of not the thing itself, or rather not just about the object itself, but how it kind of shapes behavior around it and how it shapes its relationship to nature and the environment. So we've always really tried to focus on that. Kiesler, I think the quote is from
May I
Philip
interrupt
Johnson,
maybe
that
if
he
you'd
was the
like
most.
to go full screen so we can see we can see the slides, so maybe you display. Yes,
Does that do it?
yes, perfect, thank
Oh,
you.
great. What were you looking at before, Irene?
We were looking, it was just smaller and we could see other
Oh,
slides
see.
next to it.
I
Yes,
see.
okay.
Okay, so now you can see Kiesler.
Full screen, yes.
I love this photo. So
Mhm.
this is him working on this project, and Philip Johnson labeled him the most famous architect who never built. And this is his, first he started working on this idea of endless theater, and thinking about, kind of cities and life as kind of theatrical stages that are always in formation, which became this idea of endless space, where users kind of appropriate, reconfigure space through movement and give it meaning. And so those abstract ideas coalesced into his project Endless House, which he worked on for decades and never built. And so this picture of him inside this construct for me is the life of the architect, kind of rehearsing these ideas over and over again, but in different ways, at different scale, and constantly kind of circulating around these questions of space and how it shapes behavior and how it could encourage social interaction. So I thought I had to share first the exhibit design that we did. How do I get this to?
I'm not sure, because I think if you're seeing that, then that's what we're gonna be seeing.
Weird. Bear with me for 1 second. I want to. So if I do this, and maybe duplicate.
There you go.
Okay, I figured it out. All right.
We can see it perfectly here as well.
Great. Okay, because it was the speaker mode over here. Okay. This was our exhibition design for the Kiesler exhibit at the Drawing Center years ago. And so our response to his provocation of endless space was this table, which we called the endless table. It's 145 feet long. And it was a design to house his sketches and sketchbooks and drawings, et cetera, organized around different aspects of his work. This is the first and only exhibit at the Drawing Center, which is only about drawings, where they didn't use the walls. And that was very important for us because we really wanted to disengage the kind of relationship between the art viewer and the art, and disengage it from the wall. This goes back to one of Kiesler's projects for the Peggy Guggenheim Museum, where everything was hung at an angle. specifically so that it would challenge your relationship to art, so that it wasn't so static. So I love this snapshot of the security cam, which shows you our kind of, our intention, which was to remove the art from the walls and to stretch it along this endless table. The smaller pieces go inside the table and the larger pieces are on these panels. And the bigger the panel, the more vertical the angle is. But it is about this idea of the active void, that you are not looking at the wall, you're looking at the table and those across the table. And we were really interested in how that experience would change as you walk around this table and engage with the art and the other viewers, and put yourself in a much more dynamic position. It's modular. And the Drawing Center still has these pieces. So we really love the idea that, it's endlessly reconfigurable. It has been used as straight pieces and has created other reconfigurations, which I think is what we took from Kiesler, this idea of endlessly reconfiguring space. This idea of the active void, we also kind of thought about it for a temporary installation that we did in Taiwan in a very ecologically beautiful and sensitive area of Taiwan called Haiping. Thank you. You never know who's going to show up at Upstate Art Weekend. This is Hualien in Taiwan, and the art festival organizers asked us to do something, which is hard for an architect not to have a program to push back against, but we decided to design a pavilion for the local Aboriginal tribes called the Amis. And we started looking at how they gather in these lodge houses and what they do, which is basically storytelling, dancing, singing. And so we wanted to design a polycentric pavilion, a pavilion with many centers, not just one, with the idea that, to flip the relationship or to always make that role between spectator and performer dynamic. Something that we try to show in this series of images of the model in the round in our office. It was built out of green bamboo that was locally harvested to build the 11 vaults that are braced together around this ring. So is the stage underneath one of these 11 vaults, or is it in the middle? So the Amis, and there are several tribes, sing, but it is not a very static thing, the singing and storytelling. It's very much a kind of call and response. So I could be up here singing and someone in the audience could be heckling me, and it goes back and forth in that way. And that's what we wanted to create, this kind of polycentric pavilion where performer and audience are rotating and oscillating back and forth. And again, that for us is very much taken from Kiesler, the idea of the user, kind of experiencing architecture in motion, but also giving meaning by the way in which they construct relationships between each other. And in this case, the relationship between that pavilion and the forest that was surrounding it. So that project in Taiwan, that was 2011. 7 years earlier, we had designed an installation at MoMA PS1, which was the first time that we worked with green bamboo. In this case, Philostachys aurea, which is very, very flexible, actually. And so we were very interested in how to take something that is I don't want to restart. How to take something that was weak, apparently weak, and supple, because it needed to be green and fresh in order to bend. So how do you take something that is inherently weak and supple and make it strong and structural? And we were also fascinated by the change that would happen to the bamboo, going from green to, at the beginning of the summer, to very dry and yellow by the end of the summer, and how it would change also in terms of the environment that it was exposed to. So the mist and the water. Kiesler encouraged, so I don't know if there's some Columbia students here, so I'm talking to them right now. I don't know whether you know that Kiesler ran a lab at Columbia, an experimental design research lab, where he encouraged the students to throw out the brief and to rethink program without walls, without boundaries. And we were very much thinking about that, how to create different zones of play, of lounging, of social interaction without walls. And so we thought about how to do that with microclimates, to create very specific microclimates. So you can see at the bottom of the image, these misters that cool that pad down, and each environment is actually a void, a kind of active void open to the sky. And so you see in the picture kind of dancing pad in the front, the pool, the so-called pool pad in the background. And we were really looking at how these environments were outward facing and inward facing at the same time, and how you feel these boundaries without walls, which for us was the goal, to kind of get people to really interact with each other, but also to think about the interaction between buildings and the environment and how to create microenvironments. So that is our DNA as it came from Kiesler, but of course it came from a lot of other inspirations. And I would say that was definitely earlier work. The other way in which I think about correlations or co-relations has to do with the different realms of work that we do now. A sociologist would look at this diagram and understand right away that home is first space, work is second place, and no, space, sorry, not place, and publics is third space. We think about this in the sense that, you know, we are working on housing, we are working on rethinking work typologies, and we are working on public space. And for us, we really don't think of these types as very separate from each other. We think of them as really contributing to each other and really shaping the outcome of each other. So when we think about home, we think about livability and what makes things livable. How does, you know, how are cities livable or not very livable? What is missing from thinking about how we live in cities? We did a competition. We're hopeful that it will lead to something, but this is a competition that was initiated by the City Planning Commission of Chicago, and it's called Chicago Come Home. And it has to do with the fact that the Black population of Chicago has been slowly been decreasing since its height in the 90s. Which has left pockets of the city with a lot of vacant lots. And so for reasons of inequality, lack of opportunity, etc., the Black community has been leaving, and I think it's definitely a third less than from the heights in the 90s. And so the Chicago Come Home competition is focusing on 6 neighborhoods with a lot of vacant lots that kind of look like this, which is very unsafe, right? So there's a lot of missing teeth in all of these neighborhoods. particularly the corner lot, because the corner lot during the riots were deemed to be the most dense and therefore the most so-called dangerous, and so they were demolished. There are a number of different multi-family housing typologies in Chicago. We took on the 6 flat, which is what you see on the screen, which you enter in the middle. There are 2 sides of apartments. The sides get very, very bad or no view, and so your only view is the front and the back. The front is usually a very formal kind of sunroom. And so therefore, the actual active living space only gets views from the front and the back. What was interesting to us is that Chicago decided to first focus on the commercial avenues with the argument that, you know, there's so much missing from these neighborhoods that there was nowhere to buy groceries or, you know, get provisions or so they focus first on commercial districts, the street themselves. And that for us was the inspiration to start thinking about how to rethink the 6 flat and how to think about the kind of your home, not just the unit, your apartment unit, but your home includes how your building sits on the street and your street environment and the neighborhood, et cetera. So we titled the project The Missing Middle because this is the kind of, you know, we thought it was very important to think about housing as part of the infrastructure of cities. And so we rethought the kind of bay window, which is quite ubiquitous in Chicago, rather than a formal sunroom, kind of reflecting how we really live now, but also to move the stair from a hidden zone in the middle to the front so that there could be more eyes on the street. And so that there's more kind of neighborly awareness of each other. The formal sunroom becomes the kind of balcony or a bedroom or Zoom room off the bedroom to reflect how we live now. But all of this has eyes on the street. And so the way in which you connect vertically becomes a very public space. And then, you know, kind of rippling out from that, you know, hoping to contribute to a sense of safety in, you know, arriving home through this more generous lawn area and hopefully starting to add back those missing middle scale, middle piece between home and city, one lot at a time. A lot of that thinking is coming from our micro-unit apartment building that we did in New York. So this was in response to a public competition that was launched by city planning to kind of rethink how we build and to acknowledge that the demographic in cities is really, really different now and is at a complete disconnect from the housing regulations. And it really starts with Jacob Riis, who turned his camera onto the city's poor. At that time, over half of the city was living under poverty rates, mostly immigrant class. And kind of thinking about the paradox now, which is that the American home has ballooned, almost doubling in size, whereas the American household is shrinking and is far more complex than a nuclear family. And so the reason why this is important is because all of the regulations are for housing, for living spaces, are geared towards the nuclear family. Whereas in New York, almost half of us live in small households. And so the competition that the city launched was to ask the question, should we shrink the minimum size of apartments below 400 square feet to 300? And so this was our response, which is not just about how do you design a small space well, but how do you design it in such a way to counteract the other paradox, which is the loneliness of society. And in just because we live alone doesn't mean that we want to be by ourselves completely. So the idea is to kind of disperse all of the amenities in such a way that you are always, walking by one of them on your way home to your apartment, to try to encourage social interaction, even though the apartment is small. This was the first and possibly the only 100% micro unit apartment building. We had 2 construction sites on site and in the prefab factory. So the units past the ground floor are all modular. And this is basically a timeline of construction. So you can kind of see, I don't know if you see my mouse, that it starts with a chassis, which is steel frame, concrete on top. And these posts are the only structure. So they link up kind of like Legos. And so this is the timeline. And the units leave out the factory across the Brooklyn Bridge only at midnight to avoid traffic. And so the modular construction definitely was important for this project. We were within 1/8 inch tolerance, which is impossible for traditional construction, but it was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we would have lost a line of units and the development would have been unviable. But it was also very, very necessary because everyone was worried about what this means. Are we going back to, SROs? Are we going back to tenement housing? No, we are not, because we are complying with ADA code for kitchens and bathrooms, etc. This is the typical units. The stair and the elevator is also a prefab unit. So you can see that each prefab unit is the module, is the apartment unit itself plus a little bit of the corridor. So when the units are shipped, everything is closed up except for the drywall on the corridor side. Because what happens on site is that from the corridor side, all of the hookups happen. So what that means is that when the units are shipped, everything is in. The appliances, not the appliance, the plumbing fixtures are in, all the mechanical, the ductwork, etc., is within the unit. And so what is happening on site are the connections of all the pipes, ducts, etc., between units and between floors. That's why they leave the corridor side open. This is what we call a living drawing, which is something that we've been experimenting with, how to draw the objective and physical and kind of information, but also how to try to project the experience of a project. And here we're trying to show the kind of reconfigurability of some of the units because they are studios, the living, sleeping patterns. And so in the plan, you can really see how, it's a building of kitchens and bathrooms because, all of that is to code. And everything is actually to code. It's simply that living and sleeping is the same space. These are some of the units for the formerly homeless veterans. There are 55 units. 40% are affordable out of the 40. So that's and then a percentage goes to formerly homeless veterans. That meant that out of 55 units, there were 14 that were put up for the public lottery. And there were 60,000 applicants for those 14, which is very depressing and just simply points to the fact that we need more affordable housing. In this sequence, I'm kind of showing the building in the round. It's like David and Goliath, you know, this small brick building in this brick bowl, surrounded by NYCHA housing and New York hospitals all around. But it was important for us that even though the units were micro units, that it didn't project a kind of diminished experience or diminished quality of housing. And so the massing are 4 micro towers that are clad in a gradient of gray to light gray brick, which for us was a stitch between the NYCHA housing, the dark brick NYCHA housing, and the white glazed brick of the hospitals. So that was home. Second is work. We've been really proud to, I'm not going to actually talk about the first project very much, just to kind of set it up. We've been working with Ping on the Made in New York Bush Terminal campus, which is a renovation of former warehouses into new manufacturing hub for the city. And for us, it's really important because we recognize that, you know, this project is on a waterfront, and we recognize that waterfronts are incredibly contested territories where we need more housing. We also need to hang on to manufacturing because we are losing the, you know, the skilled laborers from cities, but we also need a lot more public space. So we're, you know, and that is kind of my point about how all of these things are interconnected for us. And so that project is for the city and is for this initiative called Made in New York. That's just background. The project that I want to focus on is another light manufacturing project called the ADO Design Center, which sadly died during COVID, but in its lifetime, it was really, really exciting. A very exciting design community came together. So it's in the neighborhood. When we started, looked like that. Former warehouses everywhere, a lot of light manufacturing all around, lots of fabricators, and a lot of humble buildings that look like this, with openings that are not very transparent, with loading docks, etc. But we love ugly buildings because we see endless possibilities. We opened up all of the openings, we enlarged all of them, kept the proportion, but we just greatly enlarged all of them. We saved all that brick. And we asked the bricklayers to put back the brick around the openings, but don't paint it. They were like, "Are you sure?" No, don't paint it, leave it. It's beautiful. And this is, you know, also a kind of, you know, provocation, you know, to builders when we can, to you know, collaborate with us. It's a way of setting up loose rules, but not the final outcome, which we were really interested in. I lost my controls. Oh. And so the client was BMW Mini, and but there are no cars here. They wanted it to be a kind of platform for designers, tinkerers, innovators, many different programs in here, starting with the cafe restaurant. This space, we called it the free space. It was the only public co-working space in the city. They hosted minimum 200 events every year. This is, if you can see my mouse. Yeah. This is the retail shop, which highlighted the work of the people who were in this space, the business accelerator space. And then this is co-working and fabrication, library, classrooms. Is kind of a, you know, GSAP program. And then this courtyard in the back, which was formerly outdoor space, and we convinced them that they didn't need any more indoor space. So they should just remove the roof and see what happens. And so this is the kind of fluid connection that we wanted to have between the restaurant and that free space, and then from the view from the other side. Our client, maybe they also were inspired by Kiesler, told us no walls, no walls. But we said, you need walls. You have education, you have cafe, you have, office space. The DOB does not like no walls. When you have all of these different use groups, the Department of Buildings needs walls and fire protection. So we did our best with acoustic curtains. These are some of the many events that were staged: art events, book talks, launches. And above that free space is what we call the periscope, which is a way in which we try to connect what we do with a much broader scale, whether it's a physical scale or a time scale. And so this was a little bit of a joke because our clients, BMW Mini, are from Munich, and they thought that they wanted to be up on the roof to see Manhattan. And we said, sorry, you can't. This is M2 zoning. You can't occupy the roof, but we will bring Manhattan to you. And so this is an image of Brooklyn and the Chrysler Building reflected. And these are our clients' Instagram shots, which we were so happy about because she understood us. She said, I know what you're after, change. And the kind of the idea that the color of light and the kind of reflection of the sky and the reflection of that public art project on the roof would come down into the space in different ways. And so the change of the environment is reflected below with the change of events. And we said, yeah, that's it. And the other change is this courtyard. This is the formerly interior space, and we convinced them to rip the roof off. And so they invited incredible artists like the Assemble Collective from London and UVA, United Visual Artists, which we loved because that was our point and that was our hope that, that our work would always be in conversation with the people who inhabited, the people that they invite into the business accelerator space, to the artists who, take on the courtyard or take on whatever space that, it's in dialogue with the existing armature, our intervention and the future interventions. I have no idea what time it is. Am I okay? Okay. The last section is about publics, and about the way in which, increasingly when we build in public space, we are being asked, and we happily are thinking about the impact of buildings in nature, and how we can ameliorate post-industrial sites, how we can tread lightly to minimize the impact on existing ecological habitats. So this is for the city of Hoboken. This is their largest park, and they call it Resilient City Park. It's quite nice. Hoboken is very low-lying, and if it rains 1/4 of an inch, this neighborhood used to flood. This is our site. It was a pop-up park before we started the project. But so the idea was, how do you mitigate the flooding of this neighborhood? So again, it's not about just the block or 3 blocks of the park, but about mitigating the kind of the flooding for like about 3 blocks beyond this. The pavilion is sitting at the intersection between the more passive areas, of the open lawn, the kind of bioswale play area, the formalized recreation area, and the urban plaza, the water feature. So it sits in between all of those, and we thought of the building as a portal between all of those moments. We were asked to design a public bathroom, and we are always trying to expand our brief literally, physically expand our brief. And so we thought, yeah, okay, you also need something else for parents, you need something else for the community, et cetera. So it became a cafe and a public community room, and in between is a sheltered space for the park. The scale, you know, we're obsessed with integrating landscape into architecture and vice versa. And so the columns are disguised as, I call them Dr. Seuss trees. They are climbing plants, but we wanted to connect the landscape of the park into the pavilion. This is almost done, but these are the most recent photos that we have, the kind of spaces that we're obsessed with, kind of in between indoor, outdoor. This is that portal space. I was so excited to see the shadows of the rings, which I didn't really think about. It's the limitation of rendering software, I guess. And so these are the kinds of spaces of, you know, from one volume to the space in between through to the other volume that we're really obsessed with in many of our projects. Chicago Navy Pier, similar ideas. The pier is one of Daniel Burnham's 5 piers that he had planned for Chicago, but only one was built. The pier that we inherited had gone from everything from, like, you know, at this point, I think it was a military depot, and then it became DePaul University. And when we inherited, it was called the People's Pier. Very much a kind of festival marketplace environment, very commercialized. You actually couldn't see Lake Michigan at all between all of those banners and all the funnel cake vendors. Lake Michigan is actually sinking, paradoxically. We in New York are basically always concerned with resiliency, protecting from flood, right? With Hoboken, for example, but the lake is shrinking, and we wanted to design all of the pavilions to capture environmental change. And so the lake pavilions reflect the dock, the people activity on the dock, as well as the lake. And it changes radically. The lake is Caribbean blue in the summer, and then it freezes in the winter. And that's part of the kind of change that we wanted to capture. The soffits of the lake pavilions, one side reflects the pedestrian activity on the dock, and the other side reflects the water. And it is always different, which was one of our goals. I'm from Chicago. I know that only tourists go to Navy Pier, and my goal was to bring Chicagoans to the pier and offer places of respite, because this is south facing. The beginning of the pier initially had a kind of red gate that said Navy Pier, which does everything to basically make it feel like it is not part of the city. We removed the gate, and in its place, we put this information tower. We wanted to, it's a scalar game. We wanted to speak to the skyline of Chicago, but the tower itself is only 45 feet tall, but it's like a mini me of the skyline. And it is clad in mirror glass with a mirror interlayer, so that the higher you look, the more it blends into the sky. It reflects the sky coverage or the fireworks. And the light program is follows the moon cycle. So in a new moon, the light is quite dim, and under a full moon, it's really bright. The largest intervention is what we call the wave wall, which is a 300-foot long plinth. It was an existing plinth. And we needed to connect the lower dock to the upper dock. It is in appearance a singular gesture, a wall that cants out to become an overlook and cants back to become stairs, but it's actually made of a lot of prefabricated parts that came from a fabrication, a shop in Milwaukee. the contractors complained about the louvers that became stairs because it needed to be quite precise. But it was another way in which we wanted to create a different engagement with the lake. In the pictures that I showed you of the existing, there was really no connection to the lake. And for us, you know, this was about this kind of, you know, overlook, but also a very, very social space in the middle of the a kilometer long pier. So you need a break. And it has become a beloved kind of overlook onto the lake. The last project that I want to show you is closer to home. It's in Long Island, the Jones Beach Energy and Nature Center, which is on the very, very west end of Long Island, where it's ecologically very sensitive habitat. That photo that you see is was the existing building. It's an SOM designed bathhouse. Not this one, but this is the other end of the beach that is really popular. This is a Moses era beach. But on our end, it looks like this. And that was that, if you can see in the picture, the existing bathhouse. Because it's Moses, that bathhouse sat in the biggest parking lot in the city. It used to go to this line. We chopped off almost a half of the parking lot and used it as rubble to lift up the building, but also to create new bioswales. And so the program is nature and energy exhibits, partly because of the funding source. So it started as a welcome center, but with two different funding sources, one from New York State Parks, the other from the local power authority. And initially they wanted two separate spaces, and we convinced them, A, you don't have the funds for all of that. B, there is a kind of intellectual sharing and an intellectual conversation that is very interesting between nature and energy, and why don't you combine the mission of the center? So this is showing the kind of how that came together in terms of just dealing with the existing building versus the new resiliency laws. And so we had to raise the building out of the floodplain. So this is showing you how we took that concrete rubble and used it underneath. The light monitors are over the exhibit area. So the lower ceiling heights are the closed offices and classrooms. The most important aspect maybe is the trellis that wraps all the way around, which is a way in which we were thinking about education and the exhibits, that it needed to, you know, kind of expand between the inside and the outside. It sits on the beach. The beach itself is the focus of the exhibit. And so all of the exhibits are, you know, starting from the inside, but very much are always kind of extended to the outside through that trellis. This was featured at MoMA last year, part of their exhibit called New York New Publics. And their use of the term publics was very validating for us, because we always used it in the plural, and we kind of thought, yeah, it's not really proper English, but you know, it's how we thought of it, because it's not one entity. It's never going to be universal. Oops, sorry, I screwed that up. It's never a universal entity when you design for the public. And so this is the film that was commissioned for the exhibit, taking you through the different spaces. So this is one of those gallery spaces, and you can see, you know, the light monitors. this is the nature side. Before that, we were in the energy side. The building is organized, it's long because I forgot to mention, we use the existing foundations of the existing building and raise them. And we had to expand, but we couldn't expand closer to the beach, so we expanded lengthwise. So you can imagine the kind of the light play of that trellis onto that porch space. We really wanted it to feel like a porch. This is on a bike trail. There are many, many bird watchers that come here. And as with many of our projects, starting with PS1, the idea that we can capture attention and capture a random passerby who doesn't really know what's inside, doesn't know that there's a museum inside PS1 or doesn't know that there's a center inside here, would still be welcomed, would still, feel like it's home, even though it's public space, and would kind of stop and think about the relationship between how we build, the impact on the nature or the environments in which we build, and the connection between all of that with each other. That's what we spend most of our time on. Thank you. I'll stop share. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Since this is a hybrid event and we're on Zoom and you're physically in person at the T2, we would welcome questions as they arise both ways. And our residents here on the panel, please feel free to unmute and let's discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't want to. It's fine. Very slow.
Hi, Mimi. Thank you for sharing your works. I have one question about that. I'm really interested in about your interpretation of the correlations that boundary of home, work, and publics. That I'm really interested in that your gesture about gesture about the private and public spaces together in each project. So I'm curious about what are you thinking about the public and private relationship each other in the urban scale or other in the architecture scale?
It really depends on the site, honestly, but so I think your question is a universal one, which makes it a really hard one, but it's a good question. I think about and first I would say that, I'm always very suspicious of public-private, because I think that it's overly simplistic to put it in binary opposition to each other. And the way that we think about publics is, in a sense, that it's a bunch of private bodies, right, that are sharing public space. But what makes public space successful and beloved is the capacity to feel like it's yours. So just one anecdote, there's been a lot of studies about how people feel in public space if they can somehow make it theirs. Pick up a chair and move it, versus the chairs that are fixed, right? Like if you see, in public spaces, the fixed chair, the fixed table, nobody's in it. If they can just have the agency and feel invited to even shift it, right? To make their own space, to reconfigure it however they want, right? It's always much more successful, right? So I think about that a lot, about how to, give people agency to reconfigure, to create your own boundaries within a larger public space, to create your own zone, for you, for your small group, whatever, right? And of course, without boundaries, right? So with changes in material or the microclimate or whatever, the light effect, how do you create that variety without losing a sense of the whole? For us, that's always been the challenge.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm looking at my Columbia students in the room.
Hello, Mimi. Thank you. Thank you so much
Hello.
for the lecture. So probably follow up the last questions. I see there's a kind of a, let's say, ambition and agenda that is not limited to, let's say, designing only building, but it kind of reach to the broader social and urban context. Probably the question is from perspective of an architect. I'm sure it's a demanding process to let's say tackle on the issues at bigger scale. But I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of experience of, because as you mentioned before, sometimes the budget or the contractor is not necessarily happy with that. So I'm wondering the kind of broader ambition would necessarily lead you to a rewarding experience as an architect, as a designer.
Can you rephrase your question again?
So typically, if we're commissioned to do a building, we probably just focus on the architecture aspects. But I see your project's trying to.
I mean the last part that you said.
Okay.
Question part.
Yeah. So I know dealing with the different parts, but architecture design is a demanding experience. But I'm wondering if it's necessarily a rewarding experience. I have to tackle all the issues.
Yeah. It's very rewarding. It's also a pain in the butt, but it's very rewarding. It's funny because, everybody's career just takes them in different places. We just did our first house. We finished it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and we just finished our second house. We've been in practice for almost 25 years now. So it's funny because, for a long time, before the houses, we've been mainly working for city, state agencies, nonprofits, doing housing, but also, public buildings and public projects, in public spaces. For us, we never really wanted to fall into the New York trap of high-end residential and retail. We always wanted to do work that had the, chances of the greatest social impact. The difficulty of that work is sometimes you are really interpolating in order to arrive at something, because they are very horizontal organizations where you have, 20 different, stakeholder input, and everybody is really concerned about the thing that they are responsible for. And so it can be very hard to, arrive at something that is unifying, but that is also the reward. A project that I didn't show you, that we did, was for the New York State Equal Rights Heritage Center. And we finished it the same year that we finished, a high-end, residential tower in Hong Kong. And that small project in this small town in upstate New York, the opening of it, it felt like the whole town showed up because it was very important to them. It was the first municipal building that the town built in 40 years. And it was very, very essential to a lot of people in the town. And it was just a very different experience from the opening of the tower in Hong Kong, which was quite frustrating because when we arrived for the opening, we realized that they had changed all these things without telling us, So that in combination with COVID actually cemented our belief in staying a little bit closer to home so that we could be, far more involved during construction when everything happens, when you really, need to be very flexible and to, make compromises with everybody in order to see the thing through. So it's really, really challenging, but also very rewarding. But at the same time, Eric and I are at a place right now where we're thinking more houses would be nice. Because they also, give us a chance to explore and experiment a bit more with craft, which is much harder to do in public projects because of liability, etc. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much.
Hi. I was really impressed, not only from all the presentation, but also the way that you visually communicated your work at the apartment houses through the plants, the moving plants, because not yes, I think yes, and so I think the correlations were actually visually communicated. So I wanted to ask how this could be, in a way, at the last projects that were about public. How do you see it also as visually communicating this correlationship?
That's a great question. Yeah, in probably in different ways, right? Like I don't know if I'm answering your question, so please interrupt me if I'm not, but I guess the two living drawings that I showed you were very much about the plan, right? And how it gets occupied and the different use scenarios, right? I'm thinking about another project that I didn't show you, but it's an obsession of ours, the kind of the idea that architecture is some sort of armature for nature, and is intertwined with it, is supports it, whatever. So we've done different kinds of so-called living drawings that kind of try to imagine the how landscape grows around, on top of, through our structures. Is a different kind of take on the question of time. And definitely we were inspired by Kiesler. I mean, I am talking about Kiesler because of you guys, because of the residency program, but there many other experiments, Bernard Shumi's, event cities and the idea of drawing the event, right? We were very, very inspired by that also, like how to capture, Bernard's question of how to capture change and transgression and contingency, right, is something that we've been thinking about for a very long time. And honestly, the drawings that I showed you, we did them for the book. The book came out in 2019. We had been in practice for almost 20 years. And a lot of that is thinking about things with the beauty of hindsight. What are we really after, and how can we try to see the connections between the work? So the book started with Eric and I banging our heads against the wall, trying to write an essay that just would not come out. So we started to panic, and then we thought, okay, let's just start drawing. This is what we know how to do. Let's just start drawing and see what comes out of the conversation of how to draw, and so the essay in our book came out of redrawing all of our projects.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can talk in person. I'll bid them goodbye. Yeah. Any last questions?
On the Zoom?
Oh, there's things in the chat. I'm sorry, I didn't even.
There are.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I missed any. No.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm
No
monitoring the
questions.
chat. Yes, there is
Okay.
no question in the chat. But if you want to keep the conversation going live in person, please do that. Mimi, this was fascinating, and I love to just hold what you just said in terms of correlation. In a way, the way I understood is to correlate is to change, it is to move, it is to eliminate boundaries. And this adds a lot to the conversation that we have already had with the residents within that framework of correlations. And it's fascinating work. I love how you're synthesizing and executing the projects and coordinating all these groups of people and giving back to the community in so many rich ways. Thank you so very much. It was a pleasure
You're
to
very
have
welcome.
you. Thank
Thanks
you.
for the invite, Irene.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
More soon.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Good luck to the residents. And
Absolutely.
welcome to
Yeah.
Rhinebeck when you get here. You're
Absolutely.
gonna love it.